This week on Jerusalem Dateline, businesses stand to make billions from lifting Iranian sanctions, but will it stop Iran from getting the bomb? And is Iran hiding its nuclear activity? Plus, U.S. congressmen harassed by Muslims on the Temple Mount, and keeping the vision for Israel alive in the next generation. Hello, and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl, filling in for Chris Mitchell, who's on assignment. While most world leaders are fretting over bombs and stockpiles in the Iranian nuclear deal, some Europeans are focusing on lining their pockets. As CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell reports, lifting Iranian sanctions could mean billions.
One sign resulting from the controversial nuclear deal with Iran could read, "Open for business." That's why the German economics minister and French foreign minister ran to the front of the line to visit Tehran.
Economic factors will be dominant, while the other aspects of the deal, which is Iran compliance, will be pushed aside, I'm afraid.
Reports say European businesses are ready to compete for their share of the 77 million strong Iranian market. Sanctions relief in the deal would pour between $50 to $150 billion into the Iranian economy, enabling Iran to become better at what it already does well, export terrorism.
It's a huge amount of money that will help them to recover their economy, to keep the regime in power, and to use that money in order to finance all of those terrorist organizations in the region.
There will be enough money for Iran to export the revolution into Syria, to help Hezbollah, to send missiles and the know-how how to build missiles, rockets to Hamas.
President Obama even admitted that the terrorists would benefit from sanctions relief, but said it was worth the trade-off for Iran not to get a nuclear bomb.
Let's stipulate that some of that money will flow to activities that we object to.
Iran supports terrorist organizations, Obama said, and even groups that have killed American troops.
The truth is that Iran has always found a way to fund these efforts, and whatever benefit Iran may claim from sanctions relief pales in comparison to the danger it could pose with a nuclear weapon.
Within 8 years, people like Qasem Soleimani, commander of the Quds Force that supports terror proxies throughout the Middle East, will be off some lists. Israeli Interior Minister Silvan Shalom told CBN News it doesn't make sense.
It looks an absurd that a terrorist like Soleimani, that is running all of the terrorist operations here in our region, will be out of that list and will be a free man. And the Israelis are brought to the International Court in The Hague.
In fact, Western intelligence agencies said he already broke travel sanctions when he visited Moscow and met with Russian leaders last month. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Michael Seagal says dangerous people will be taken off the sanctions list.
There is a guy, most of people probably didn't hear about him. His name is Faridun Abbasi Davani. He was the head of the Iranian Atomic Energy Association, one of the most skillful nuclear scientists, and people like him will be moved out from the sanction list.
Iranian leader Ayatollah Khamenei may soon press his advantage. According to a New York Post report, he recently released a 416-page book called Palestine, in which he lays out a plan to destroy Israel. As Congress debates the nuclear deal and the friction continues between the U.S. and Israel, it's clear the mullahs will see them as one, the great and little Satan, and they still call for death to both.
Iran denies it's hiding its nuclear activity, even though satellite photos of a military complex show that work is ongoing. It's just one more item that Congress will have to evaluate as it debates the nuclear agreement with Iran.
This satellite image shows activity at Iran's Parchin military complex, a site often suspected of building a nuclear warhead. Iran claims the work is related to road construction, while others suggest it's a cleanup operation before IAEA inspectors arrive. As lawmakers on Capitol Hill debate the Iranian nuclear deal, they must decide if Iran can be trusted. Another question, can U.S. intelligence services find out how close Iran is to a nuclear bomb? If history is any judge, their record since World War II is not promising.
Beginning all the way back in the 1940s with the Soviet Union at that time, the Communist Chinese, later on the Pakistanis, the Indians, the South Africans, all developed programs without the Western services, any of them apparently, or the IAEA, once it had come into existence later, knowing about them.
Claire Lopez from the Center for Security Policy believes Iran practices a dual nuclear strategy, one hidden and one for the world to see.
The entire program has always had a clandestine pathway to the bomb to it. I don't think we have anywhere near 10 years or 15 years, but the real program moved underground and remains to this day, in large part, I think, a covert or a clandestine nuclear weapons program. And the proof of that is that every so often another site will be revealed.
Lopez agrees with Israel that the current nuclear deal fails to address Iran's secrets.
I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu was exactly right to say that this deal, if it goes through, legitimizes the overt pathway to a bomb for Iran, but it doesn't even address the covert pathway to a bomb, which continues unaffected by sanctions or anything else.
Given past failures of Western intelligence to uncover hidden nuclear programs around the world, U.S. lawmakers will have to determine they won't be fooled again. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Washington.
U.S. congressmen say Muslims harassed them on a recent visit to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The incident was captured on a cell phone camera. This video shows someone telling their guide he could not use the term Temple Mount, only the Muslim reference to the Dome of the Rock. There have been serious disturbances on the Temple Mount on and off since last fall. Israeli security has been stepped up following 2 recent arson attacks allegedly carried out by Jewish extremists. Authorities are on guard against further acts and the possibility of violence carried out in the form of Palestinian revenge. As John Waggy explains, this has also forced the country to examine its own society.
When an apparent Jewish extremist hurled a firebomb into an Arab home, killing a toddler and his father, it led to outrage from Israeli leaders and citizens.
Every society has extremists and has murderers. The test of a morality of a society is how it responds to those extremists and how it responds to those murderers.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the family targeted in the attack, and rabbis prayed for their recovery. Israeli leaders also quickly condemned an arson attack on the historic Church of the Multiplication of Loaves and Fishes in the Galilee in June. Hebrew graffiti scrawled at both sites led authorities to conclude that Jewish extremists were behind the attacks.
We're talking about a youth culture which is in opposition to the Israeli state as it is, to Israeli society as it is.
Dr. Shlomo Fisher says these extremists believe they are carrying out God's will.
They say they would want to have it more biblical law, more biblically oriented. They talk about a monarchy.
That means inviting a king to rule Israel and ridding the country of idolatry as they see it.
They would not want what they consider to be idolatry, which does include Christianity, especially Eastern Christianity, and the rabbinical establishment does not accept that definition.
While this phenomenon isn't new, Fisher maintains it's on the fringe of society.
Israel does have a self-image that is democracy, that is committed to humanistic values, that it values human life of everyone who's created in the image of God.
The other trouble for Israel comes in the form of revenge from Palestinians, yet that violence receives no condemnation. On the contrary, when Israelis are killed or wounded in this form of terrorism, Palestinians rejoice.
They honor, they even reward with financial rewards Palestinians who would kill an Israeli.
Itamar Marcus, director of Palestinian Media Watch, says the Palestinian Authority makes role models and heroes out of terrorists.
There are 25 schools that we have found, and there probably are more, that are named after terrorists. They name sporting events after them. They build memorials and name town squares after terrorists.
John Waggy, CBN News.
Coming up, they came to America seeking refuge from terrorists. Instead, the authorities threw them into prison. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. Iraqi Christians are fleeing religious persecution from radical Islamists. Many are coming to the United States, but instead of being welcomed as religious refugees, one group was arrested and thrown in prison in San Diego. Gary Lane brings us their story.
Last year, 300,000 immigrants from Muslim countries were welcomed into the United States. Most came seeking a better life. But what about Christians escaping ISIS?
Our border's open to everyone except Christians.
Mark Arabo is spokesman for the Minority Humanity Foundation. He recently prayed with fellow Iraqi Christians outside San Diego's Otay detention facility. They gathered in protest and support for some of those detained inside. For nearly 6 months now, the U.S. Immigration Service has imprisoned 20 Chaldean Catholics for attempting to enter the United States from Mexico without prior approval. Rarely does the government comment about pending detainee cases. However, Arabo says the INS did tell the families that it lacked sufficient resources to go through individual case files to provide them with an explanation. Arabo suggests the families deserve better.
And so we're going to protest, we're going to pray for the administration and the officials to open up their hearts and minds to the victims of genocide. We're not going to stop, and we're going to hold them accountable.
Iraqi Christian Amr Moshi served as an interpreter for the United States Army during the Iraq War. Militant Muslims threatened his life because he worked for the Americans. Now he's living in San Diego and prays that his 26-year-old cousin Ziad Mati will soon be able to join him. Ziad was taken into INS custody last January. His case is finally scheduled to be heard later this week. Amr wonders why his cousin is still detained. He's not an Islamic terrorist, explained Amr, but a kind Christian who would not hurt anyone.
Ziad will not be harmful to this country, will not be danger to this country. Let him go live with his family. It's not too much. He's young, he can work, he can pay taxes, he can be happy around his family. And his family could sponsor him.
And just moments before this prayer vigil, word came that the mother of one of the detainees inside had died of cancer. The detainee had requested release for a day or two to go see her mother in the hospital before she died. That request was denied. These Chaldean Christians say that's just another example of a broken immigration system. And Amr says many of them now believe America's early troop withdrawal from Iraq is to blame for the rise of ISIS. The militant Islamic group forces Christians to convert to Islam, leave, or die.
They did not finish the mission. And we can't get papers to stay in America. Where we should go now?
When did the symbol of America become a gated fence as opposed to the Statue of Liberty? Give me your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. These are those Christians.
Gary Lane, CBN News, San Diego.
Up next, genocidal graffiti in the Holy Land. Learn what it says about killing Jews and Christians. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. It's a chilling slogan found throughout the Middle East. On Saturday, we kill the Jews. On Sunday, we kill the Christians. It's graffiti written by radical Islamists. Recently, CBN's Scott Ross sat down with author Lilla Gilbert right here in Jerusalem to discuss the link between the persecution of Jews and the persecution of Christians.
Lilla Gilbert is a California author who spends much of her time in Jerusalem. I spoke with her overlooking Jerusalem's old city and heard what she discovered about radical Islamic plans to first rid the Middle East of Jews and then of Christians. Gilbert arrived during Israel's 2006 war with Hezbollah in Lebanon for a 3-month visit and decided to stay. And now, out of all this, a book. I was fascinated by the title, Saturday People, Sunday People. Define that significance.
It's graffiti from radical Islamists that appears throughout the Middle East. In the best terms, it says first comes Saturday, then comes Sunday. But there's a flag, a photo of a flag in the book that says, on Saturday we kill the Jews, on Sunday we kill the Christians. And that's where I got the title.
Gilbert says even though many of the world's Muslims are not violent, their voice is drowned out by radical elements.
There are 1.5 billion Muslims in the world or something. I don't think every one of them is a terrorist, but I think that the influences they're under now, both governmentally and in terms of mullahs and various mosques, there's an influence that's inescapable.
And under that influence, persecution of Christians in the Middle East has exploded, so much so that Christians are leaving in droves.
There's a great danger that there will be no Christian community in the Middle East in the next 100 years, maybe less.
Where in the Middle East are we talking?
Well, the countries that kicked the Jews out between 1948 and 1970, there are hardly any Jews left in those countries. There are about 10 countries. Now the Christians are going through the same kind of abuse.
You use the term in the book, cultural intifada.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
I was referring in the book to the Temple Mount, which is where this is the most evident. But it has spread from the Temple Mount to Greater Israel because the Muslim, at least certain leaders in the Muslim community, deny that there was ever a temple on the Temple Mount or that there was ever a Jewish root in this land.
But isn't that why it's called the Temple Mount?
That's correct. In fact, even in some of the Muslim literature from the turn of the century, it speaks of the temple on the Temple Mount. But this started with Arafat. At least the most public statement of it came from Arafat when he was dealing with Bill Clinton on one of these arrangements. And he said, well, there was never a temple there.
Archaeological evidence thrown out by Muslim builders from under the Temple Mount shows that not only were there first and second Jewish temples at the site, but at one time, there was a Christian basilica. Today, neither Jews nor Christians are allowed to pray, sing, or openly worship at the holy site. Doesn't Islam believe that this is where Muhammad ascended into heaven on a white horse?
Yes, that's what they believe, and that's the only reason it's important to them. In fact, it's interesting. Jerusalem is not even mentioned in the Quran at all.
So why is it so important to the Muslims?
Well, the Muslims have sort of found political reasons to emphasize certain things over the centuries. And whenever Jerusalem has become important, it's become important because of their own regimes, wherever they were placed, whether in Syria or in Egypt or whatever. But now, of course, it's become the center of everything because they want a pan-Islamic empire. They do not want Jews or Christians in it. And that's why the focus is that there are no Jewish roots here. It's all made up.
Persecution by Islamists is not the only challenge for Christians here. I asked Lilla how Christians relate to each other here in the Holy Land. There are many Christian sects, denominations, etc., in this land. How are they doing with one another?
Not too well.
No?
They're not doing much better than the ones in America. And you've got Christians arguing about prophecy. I mean, evangelicals arguing about all kinds of things, much less the old churches who have ancient rifts within themselves that go back to the 4th century. So it's not surprising, but what we know is that we all look pretty much the same through a jihadi rifle sight. And maybe we need to remember that.
Are you hopeful?
I'm hopeful because of my faith in the Lord and in His way of working things out. Politically, I can't understand what's going to happen. My hope is in Him. That's the only hope I have. And I believe in Him, and He's worked in my life in so many miraculous ways that I have to believe He's going to work amongst His people and bring them together and protect them.
Coming up, engaging young people, how one group is keeping the vision for Israel alive in the next generation. Welcome back. For decades, Christians have supported Israel and Jewish people returning to the land. But will the next generation have the same vision? Here's a look at one group who's fighting to keep it alive.
In the early 90s, Ebenezer Operation Exodus began helping to bring immigrants from the former Soviet Union back to Israel. Now they're bringing young people for Engage Israel, a chance to experience Israel and God's plan for the Jewish people and the land.
My passion is to see young people getting trained and equipped here in Israel and then being sent back to the nations.
Andy Ernst coordinates Engage Israel.
We kind of pack their spiritual backpack with a solid understanding of Israel as of today, from the past, and in the future. And to go home with that understanding of the Bible is alive.
Getting to see the people, getting to hear from the people their story, and going to different places, saying things for myself.
They hike the Golan Heights, slap mud on at the Dead Sea, ride camels in the desert, and learn about the Holocaust.
It's been a brilliant time of study, as well as reflection, as well as sightseeing, as well as relaxation. But it really has opened my eyes to a lot of things I didn't know.
They also take on service projects like cleaning this churchyard, the streets of the Arab city of Jericho, and visiting a summer camp for Israeli children. They spend time getting to know what it's like to be a soldier in today's Israel.
Meeting the soldiers was impressive because they were really young. We gave them presents, and it was just incredible.
And in historic places like Ein Herod, where Gideon chose his army. Prayer also plays a role in their time here.
It's not really just here to have fun, like we're here with a purpose. One thing that we've been doing, which I've never done before, is we have a prayer chain every night, and so we take turns praying throughout the night for Israel.
Last summer, about 100 people from 20 nations participated in the Engage Israel tour.
And young people would take it to other young people and multiply the understanding of Israel, of Bible prophecy, of our call as Christians to stand with Israel and to help them home.
I love this land, I love this country, and an understanding of what the Lord is doing here in Israel and amongst His people is very much on my heart. And I really want to see my generation raised up to understand that also.
And they focus on facilitating Aliyah. That's helping the Jewish people to immigrate to Israel.
How blessed we are that we can get to see that with our eyes, how the people of Israel is coming back to the land that the Lord has promised to them.
And what will they tell others when they go home?
I will tell them how great it was, just because it's amazing.
To stand up for Israel.
Come themselves, experience God here in the Holy Land.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Ein Herod, Israel.
With all that's going on in the world, just remember that the God who's watching over Israel and you and me never slumbers nor sleeps. Well, that's it for this edition. Be sure to follow us throughout the week on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next week on Jerusalem Dateline.